Lake Geneva, Switzerland, July 1816. Lord Byron's breath mists the window as he looks out on the frozen lake. He traces his finger through it and then coughs. He's been hitting that opium pretty hard. They're supposed to be frolicking outside. Him is Dr. Polidori, his friend Shelley, and Shelley's wife Mary. But it's too cold for boating or hiking. A year without a summer. So instead, they're inside telling ghost stories. Polidori wrote some trash about a vampire, but Mary, she turned out a great tale. Frankenstein. Byron, meanwhile, mulls on the apocalypse. A Swiss doctor has written an article predicting that the sun is failing. Supposedly, people believing it have committed suicide, while others have gone into hysterics thinking that it's the end times. Byron puts pen to paper. I had a dream which was not at all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space. Rayless and pathless, the icy earth swung blind and blackened in the moonless air. Morn came and went and came, and brought no day. Thanks so much to Incogni for helping to keep people's personal data personal. Even before the year without a summer, parts of Europe were in a deep freeze. For instance, the colder-than-average winter of 1812 had played a major part in breaking Napoleon's invasion of Russia. And during that retreat, the mercury dropped so low that the outer flesh on horses froze. Starving soldiers could carve off strips and eat them while the horse kept moving, entirely numb. Yeah, that cold. Today, climatologists believe that 2 eruptions in 1812 had played a part in that particularly bitter winter, and that their particles were still in the atmosphere when Mount Tambora erupted. Across Europe, sunsets were red for a year. Artists tried to capture the odd hue, mixing ambers and rust colors into their landscapes. Several different crops failed, leading to food riots where the crowds carried banners reading "bread or blood." And when snow fell, sometimes as late as April, it was polluted with volcanic dust, so it appeared brown, red, yellow, or blue. The effects were particularly bad in the newly founded United States, where parts of New England experienced snowfall into June. Only a quarter of the corn harvest was edible, making prices skyrocket. And at Monticello in Virginia, a retired Thomas Jefferson experienced a near-total loss of his harvest due to frost. There were even reports filtering in of birds frozen on branches or dropping to earth, their hearts giving out mid-flight. But Europe and North America survived, because the Little Ice Age is not actually a story of apocalypse, but of adaptation. Over the centuries, humans recognized the dangers of the cooling climate and took steps to mitigate the havoc that it could wreak on their lives. Many of these adaptations involved a move away from subsistence farming to a market economy, where individuals were not responsible for producing the exact food that they ate. Possibly the greatest innovator here was the Netherlands, and it definitely reaped the rewards of that adaptation. Since the Netherlands had such low elevation, even as far back as the medieval era, the Dutch began constructing dikes and seawalls to hold back floodwaters from storms, but also to extend the shore out to sea. This building program went hand in hand with the mass construction of windmills to pump water out and prevent flooding of low-lying areas. Which, I actually never realized until now that's what most of the windmills in the Netherlands did. Guess they're not just for tourist photos. That's pretty cool. But even more revolutionary was their economic policy, which moved the population away from food production, Dutch soil being generally poor anyway, and towards skilled trades like manufacturing, investment, and oceanic trade. This was made possible by establishing regular grain imports from the Baltic nations that were more agriculturally productive, freeing up Dutch workers to make money and then buy the imported grain. So by concentrating on earning capital, this cash-flush society could also afford the higher food prices in a bad harvest year. Indeed, the Dutch even used the erratic weather of the Little Ice Age to their advantage, making aggressive moves when the grain markets were destabilized, and taking advantage of changing wind patterns to access certain areas faster than they ever could previously, a major advantage in trade and war. Tellingly, while Europe suffered, the Dutch entered their golden age. But just further south, across the Channel, another story of adaptation was going on in England. Ravaged by the Great Hunger of 1315 and the Black Death. In the Renaissance, the English began an agricultural revolution. The first wave came in the 16th and 17th centuries, as farmers began to diversify their crops away from temperamental cereal grains like wheat and barley. They mixed in clover and turnips for animal feed, causing the now well-fed livestock to be more resistant to both cold and disease. And with fewer animals sick at harvest time, fewer had to be slaughtered, which then in turn provided more breeding stock. And of course, the potato as well swept Europe after being imported from Peru. Easy to cultivate, able to grow in poor soil, and far more nutritious than bread, it truly was the superfood of the early modern era for animals. Yeah. See, potato leaves are poisonous, right? So people didn't really want to eat any part of it at first. In fact, as part of his domestic reforms, Frederick the Great tried to introduce the potato into the Prussian diet as a means of avoiding the cyclical famines common to Central Europe. That didn't work for the aforementioned reason, so instead, he sent soldiers to guard the potato fields in order to make the tubers look desirable. But not guard them too well. He wanted them to be stolen. Smart guy, that Frederick. Someone should do a series on him. Oh, wait! But England had another solution that wasn't so delicious. See, in medieval Europe, most villages had common land. These were places that peasants could farm for their own subsistence or allow herds to graze. Similarly, poor peasants also had rights to glean the Lord's field, to move through it after the harvest and pick up any grain that had fallen or stalks that could be turned into hay. But over the period of the 16th through the 19th centuries, essentially all common land in England was taken away in a system of enclosures, consolidated into larger and larger farms under the landowners. Charity practices like gleaning ended. On the one hand, this made food production more efficient and bountiful, making famines and bread riots unheard of by the 18th century. The landlords, sharing new methods of agriculture via the printing press, could also easily pivot to new and more resilient crops. Plus, they cleared forests and conditioned soils to create more cropland. But on the other hand, enclosures also turned huge amounts of peasant laborers into wage workers, who landlords hired at planting and harvest time, if they were lucky. While there had always been poor people, whose land was not very good, for example, or who had life-changing medical issues, enclosures created the modern concept of poverty as a large class of people who had to move to find work, with many moving into cities. By the 18th century, over half of English were classified as being part of the poor. And even for those employed on farms, wage competition drove their standards of living way down. So enclosures were not good, but also not enclosing wasn't great either. France, for example, didn't implement agricultural reforms, and as a result, plots of land got smaller and smaller as they were split between the descendants of aristocrats, meaning that a large-scale switch to new crops or different methods became impossible. Combine that with the French peasants initially refusing to adopt the potato, and this set the stage for a series of crop failures and famines in the 18th century that killed 10% of the French population during the rule of Louis XIV and helped lead to the Revolution. There were individual changes too. House construction changed to phase out the less efficient open fires common during the Middle Ages and replacing them with chimneys and iron stoves that could heat more rooms with less fuel. Sort of like how we're trying to individually transition to solar now. Other adaptations were not so benign. In Japan, a cycle of flood, drought, and frost that began in 1640 got so bad that the shogun ordered a freeze on the making of alcohol and non-essential food products like udon and soba. And in one province, things were so horrifyingly dire that everyone under the age of 7 was killed in a population cull. Yeah, not all forms of adaptation are good, obviously. And then, around 1850, the climate started to warm up. This was partially due to natural factors, but also because the clearance of forests to make more arable land and the increase of industrial pollution ignited the era of man-made climate change, which eerily puts us where we are today. In fact, as we were working on these episodes, Rob and myself were breathing wildfire smoke during what one scientist called the hottest summer in 120,000 years. So what can we learn in the present day from the Little Ice Age? Well, of course, it is a dire warning of what climate change can do to humans, but in an attempt to turn a bit of a frown upside down, it also really is a tale of hope. It's shown us that if we recognize the problems and make adaptations big and small, humanity can get through something like this. Heck, they can even thrive. And we sort of have to, because really, if we don't, we might soon see a year without a winter. And not to pile on the bad news, but seems like every day there's another article about a new data breach at a company that definitely has all of my information. Ugh, and this is like the 6th robocall I've gotten today. Wait, hold on. What do you mean you need confirmation to open a new bank account? I didn't open a new— dear viewer, that used to be me before I signed up for Incogni. Seriously, between the rise of data brokers collecting and selling your data, and the uptick of people search sites putting your personal info out on the internet for all to see, it's now pretty impossible to keep your private data completely private on your own. But now with Incogni, I don't have to worry about any of that, because after a very speedy sign-up, they went to work bombarding these shadowy parasites with requests to remove all of my personal info. Plus, they keep the pressure on, continually citing local laws to make sure my data stays removed for good. And I can keep track of the entire process through their intuitive real-time dashboard. Oh, would you look at that? 43 requests already completed. Heck yeah! So, if you want to keep your personal data, your personal data, you can get 60% off Incogni by visiting incogni.com/extra credits and using our code extra credits. Or to save some time, you can click right here to get Incogni, and once you've ruined a data broker's day, be sure to check out another of our videos here. The biggest bean thanks to Ahmed Ziad Turk, Angelo Valenciana, Arcalite Games, Dominic Valenciana, Izzy Coin, Joseph Blame, Kuya Koi, and Michael Hoggett for being our legendary patrons.